Welcome back. This is Bottom Line on Bloomberg Television and streaming on your tablet, your phone, and Bloomberg.com. More now on our top story. The United States, France, and Britain are moving closer to a military strike against Syria. What are the wider political and economic implications of such action, and how would Syria respond? Let's ask our roundtable. From Washington, I'm joined by Jonathan Schanzer, Vice President of Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He's a former terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Treasury Department. And joining me in studio is Tara Mahler, a research fellow at the New America Foundation and a former analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Jonathan, let me start with you. The United States and its allies are attempting to lay the legal groundwork for a military strike against Syria. Is the justification for the action the 1925 Geneva Protocol, which prohibits the use of chemical and biological weapons in a war? And Syria, by the way, did sign that protocol back in 1968.
Absolutely, and that's what the Obama administration is going to base this entire intervention on. But what's ironic about this is that it doesn't look like the administration is interested in targeting any of the purported chemical sites. As we understand it right now, they're targeting 50 other sites that belong to Syria's military that have nothing to do with chemical weapons or weapons of mass destruction. And so the messages, I think, are a little bit mixed here. And I think, in general, our communication on this seems to be a bit jilted.
Yes, I mean, I agree with Jonathan. We have not said we are going to target the chemical weapons. However, I think there's sort of a convergence of a few factors. You have the credibility issue on the chemical weapons. You have the violation of an international norm with the chemical weapons. You have the humanitarian aspect of the situation, which has been ongoing for months, and President Obama has had pressure from both sides. And to be honest, you also have strategic security interests for the United States, which I think has been underemphasized with the focus on chemical weapons, is that Syria right now has the potential to have spillover effects into the region. It has the potential to become a terrorist, extremist safe haven, and it has the potential for massive humanitarian atrocities to keep occurring, both with chemical weapons and conventional weapons. So I think it's all of these factors together.
But Tara, speaking of justification, does the president need congressional authorization for any strikes against the Assad regime? This goes back to 1973 War Powers Resolution. What happens if he orders strikes without congressional consent?
I mean, as we heard earlier today, Congress is sort of out on recess right now, and it seems like strikes are fairly imminent. I think right now, for the president's focus on getting international support, both from the European countries and members of the Arab League. I am sure he's talking to Congress on both sides of the aisle. It remains to be seen what's going to happen in terms of an official congressional vote on the matter.
Jonathan, do presidents typically kind of, they ignore this when they feel that the ends justify the means?
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about the culture of deference in Congress. It used to be that Congress was muscular when it came to foreign policy and matters of war. Over the last several decades, it has really receded into the background. And so I don't expect that Congress as a body will weigh in on this very much, but I do expect that the president has been conferring with senior leaders of the relevant committees to make sure that there is a consensus before he moves forward. But again, you know, I think that this is more of an international issue. I think the president wants to make sure that the optics are there, that this looks like an internationally led coalition rather than the United States going in alone. This is, of course, what the president campaigned on after the Iraq War, and he was very much outspoken against it because of this perception that the United States was sort of doing this cowboy routine, and so he wants to make sure that the optics are there.
Tara, how much do you think that the president's opposition, then Senator Obama's opposition to the Iraq War, might play into this thinking here?
I don't think it's going to play in much now. I think we're seeing the pressure coming from both sides, Republicans and Democrats, on President Obama. We're also seeing the international community, France, Great Britain, even countries in the Arab League, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, sort of supporting the president. So I think he's going to have the support that he needs internationally. It's not going to go through the UN Security Council because China and Russia don't seem to be currently on board. But I think he's going to have a strong international, multilateral group behind whatever action is taken. And I think he's going to actually have the support of probably military contributions from these countries in terms of bases and equipment as well.
Tara, John Judas wrote a fascinating piece in the New Republic. It raised an interesting question. Would America undertake military action to overthrow President Bashar Assad or to enforce the Geneva Protocol?
I think the administration up till today has been quite clear that they're not going to make the point of these strikes the removal of the Assad regime. What exactly the precise strategy is going to be remains to be seen. It seems like they're going to go after military targets, and they're going to try to deter and weaken Assad in his strategy, perhaps get him to either stop the attacks on the Syrian people or to perhaps come to the negotiating table. Again, though, this is not going to happen with one or two strikes. This is not going to happen with a surgical strike like we saw in Sudan, or probably even a few days of strikes. This is going to end up being a concerted campaign at strategic targets to get the regime to comply with demands or capitulate and come to the negotiating table.
Jonathan, what have past military actions told us about this, about what might be happening right now?
Well, I think we can learn certainly from Sudan that limited surgical strikes do very little. This is what happened in 1998 after the twin embassy bombings, when the United States bombed a pharmaceutical factory in Sudan, which was believed to be manufacturing chemical weapons, as well as a couple of Taliban bases, and they did virtually nothing. And so, the real concern that we have here is that the United States is engaging in what I would call cruise missile communication, that we're going to launch, let's say, 50 attacks, or 50 strikes rather, and that the goal here is to communicate to the Syrian regime that they have to stop using chemical weapons.
Right.
What that doesn't say is that they have to stop killing people by the thousands in Syria. As we know, that there's been more than 100,000 people that have been killed over these last 2 years.
Sure.
I don't believe that that's what we're communicating here. We've just simply said that they cannot continue to use chemical weapons, and I'm not sure that you can communicate that one message without drawing the United States into a broader conflict.
And if I could chime in on that with regard to the Sudan attack, it's a good example how if you don't sort of communicate the message effectively and get the correct intelligence on the targets, there could be backlash to the attacks. So simply acting and going after targets without a strategic overarching message and the right targets, it could have a negative effect in terms of the backlash. And I think this is also something the administration is going to need to watch carefully in terms of the type of retaliatory attacks that the Assad regime may direct, or even groups like Hezbollah and other groups operating in Syria may launch in response.
Tara, how do you define a proportionate response?
Well, I think what's going to need to happen is there's going to need to be a calibrated strategy, and they're going to need to watch for the effects. It seems to me that they're going to have to be very careful about their target selection, and it's going to need to be something that's they're going to have to watch for the response as they escalate their targets. But we've seen this in campaigns before. Kosovo is another model we can look to in terms of the U.S., going after strategic targets to try to get a leader to comply with certain demands.
We're going to take a quick break, but we're going to continue this discussion in just a few moments with Tara Mahler and Jonathan Schanzer about the situation in Syria when Bottom Line on Bloomberg Television continues. We'll be right back.
First, Bloomberg.
Welcome back. This is Bottom Line on Bloomberg Television and streaming on your tablet, your phone, and Bloomberg.com. Continuing our conversation on Syria. I'm joined from Washington by Jonathan Schanzer, and Tara Mahler joins me once again here in studio. Thank you both for staying with us. Tara, let me start this segment with you. A lot of economic implications here. Middle Eastern financial markets, they fell today on the prospect that international intervention may escalate the conflict in Syria. Dubai stock index plunged the most since 2009. 4 Gulf stock indexes were among the world's 10 worst performers today. And Israel, which has a vested interest in what's going on in the Middle East, the shekel posted the biggest 2-day loss in more than 3 months. What lasting effects are being felt because of all this violence?
Yes, I think we're going to see this effect on the economy going forward the next few days, not because Syria itself is strategic in terms of oil, but because of the implications it might have on the region. We've already seen spillover effects from Syria into surrounding areas, into Jordan, into Turkey in terms of refugee flows. We've already seen shelling across the border already prior to any sort of intervention. These things I'd expect would get worse in response potentially to a United States strike or a multilateral strike against any targets in Syria.
Jonathan, there's another economic component to this unrest, the price of oil. It's risen more than 15% in the last 3 months on concern that the war in Syria and violence in Egypt could disrupt production and exports, especially in Libya and in Iraq. How will the political uncertainty in the region affect oil supply routes?
Well, I think we're going to obviously be concerned about what's going on in the Persian Gulf, which is a crucial waterway for this, as well as the unrest in Egypt and the Suez Canal. But I think more broadly what we're looking at in terms of economic uncertainty is the fact that the elephant in the room here is Iran. Iran is the client state of Syria, is the client of Hezbollah. All of these various actors have the possibility of sparking wider conflict and disrupting all of these supply lines. And so really right now, in my view, all eyes are on Iran. They will be the key to whether this dies down quickly or whether we will see continued unrest.
Agree completely on Iran. One other wild card factor I wanted to throw in, just because on the way over here I caught this in the news. New York Times website was down again today, claimed by it was assumed that it's the Syrian Electronic Army once again. They've been quite active the past few weeks. I'd expect they'd become more active. Why they've been focused on media targets to date. That's not to say they don't have a list of other potential targets. Yeah. So another thing to be watching is cyber activity out of Syria as well.
Tara, because of the damage to Syria's infrastructure and, of course, right now the scarcity of food, President Assad's government is now forced to import many necessities. And then you add to that the sanctions that were imposed by the European Union. You have a country that's basically in an economic death spiral. Will Syria eventually need Western assistance to rebuild?
Eventually down the line, yes. Whether or not right now the economic effects alone are going to get Assad to sort of give in to demands, it's clear that that's not working. So I think that we are going to see there be a longer-term effect to these after any sort of conflict or strikes. Yeah. But right now it doesn't seem to be having an effect on his behavior, and we've seen this happen before with many regimes.
And Jonathan, I have about 20 seconds left. You want to get the last word in here?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that right now the lifeline to Syria is Russia and Iran. If and when all this is over, we're going to see the breakup of the Syrian state, and yes, it will be a basket case.
And Jonathan Schanzer, he's Vice President of Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, is joining us from Washington, and Tara Mahler, Research Fellow at the New America Foundation, joining us here in studio. Thank you both so much.